Envisioned as a fast patrol reconnaissance cruiser and envisioned as being able to replace numerous slower ships due to the class's very high speed, the Cheyenne-class cruiser would prove something of a disappointment once in service, becoming an oft-quoted example of ambition outstripping reality, as the design pushed the limits of available technology to its breaking point and beyond. Only a few members of the class would be built, and they would serve only briefly in Starfleet. Cheyenne-class ships measured in at 362 meters long, 262 meters wide, and were 100 meters tall, with a standard crew of 250. The class was armed with multiple Type 10 phaser arrays to provide complete coverage around the ship, as well as torpedo launchers, which could fire ahead of and behind the ship. Cheyenne typically embarked 4 shuttlecraft as well in a small shuttle bay. The most impressive feature of the class, its primary purpose in fact, was for its time blistering speed, which maxed out at warp factor 9.8. Though in service, high levels of vibration limited her speed to warp factor 9.6 for any period longer than a few minutes. By the third decade of the 24th century, Starfleet had a unique problem on their hand. The last half-century had seen the Federation expand very rapidly, with the government going from a polity claiming control over 300 member worlds in the 2250s to well over 1,000 member worlds by 2300. And it's important to remember that for every member world represented in the Federation Assembly, there were easily 100 worlds with small settlements, recently established colonies, mining outposts, and uninhabited systems which did not have representation. This rapid expansion in member worlds came with an even greater proportional increase in the volume of space that Starfleet was required to police and patrol, with the volume of the Federation growing by a factor of 10 in the span of 50 years. Fortunately, during this period of territorial growth, Starfleet had been expanding very rapidly to deal with threats represented by the Klingon and Gorn empires, the Romulan Star Empire, Tholian Assembly, Zinti Federation, Orion crime syndicates, and many others, with the Klingons in particular driving construction of large numbers of starships. It was true that the first Khitomer Accords had seen the size of Starfleet reduced dramatically, but this was largely done by scrapping the large number of legacy ships still in the fleet. And in the years after the mass scrapping, Starfleet would more than make up for the scrapped ships with new ships built with even greater capability. So many new ships had been built that, in fact, once tensions calmed down with most powers bordering the Federation, many vessels would be placed into reserve. But still, so many ships would be available that it was little problem to have ships available to patrol the vast territories of the Federation for some time. It would, however, be over the course of the next half-century, from 2300 until the 2350s, that this initial blessing would begin to be seen as something of an albatross around the neck of Starfleet. With so many ships built in the final years of the 23rd century, politicians in the 24th proved unwilling to fund more than a relative handful of new classes and new ships, citing the large stockpile of ships already in the fleet and in reserve, as well as a lack of peer-level threats to justify modernizing the fleet. And although new ships and new classes could and would be built, all featuring greatly enhanced capabilities compared to older ships, Starfleet was forced to rely on a blanket of older ships to patrol its space. This began to change in the 2350s, however, as the Federation finally realized how dated the majority of the fleet had become compared to neighboring powers, with the opening phases of the border wars with the Cardassian Union in the 2340s making this point painfully clear to all. The floodgates of funding and research would be opened, and an entirely new generation of starship family would be developed, all featuring next-gen features and capabilities, eventually leading to the Galaxy class entering service. With a whole new family of ships under development, Starfleet was able to design vessels for specific tasks, rather than building ships meant to perform multiple roles to plug multiple holes in the fleet's limited capabilities. The Galaxy would be a diplomacy-focused flagship, the California was a logistical support ship, the Norway was a lighter vessel optimized for patrol and anti-piracy missions, and so on. With this in mind, Starfleet eventually decided that the traditional cruiser role would be split between the large unit, the future New Orleans class, and smaller unit, the future Challenger class. This would, in their mind, be most sufficient to adequately fulfill the needs of Starfleet due to the vast territory necessary to patrol. Instead, however, and in addition to these ships, a need was determined for a smaller cruiser, featuring very high speed, which could be sustained for an extended period of time. Such a ship was thought able to patrol a huge volume of space, easily covering vast distances, responding to various threats and potential emergencies, and, in times of war, acting as a scout ship for a potential battle force. Dubbed the Cheyenne project in 2352, the new reconnaissance cruiser would make rapid progress in her development, with a prototype being launched in 2356, commissioning the next year, and being promptly followed by orders for several sister ships. Cheyenne-class ships began entering service with significant expectations of what they would be able to do. Expectations which seemed to be met, if not exceeded, once the ships entered service. During the class's first 2 years of active service, several Cheyenne-class ships would demonstrate their blistering speed on a number of occasions, with these demonstrations resulting in significant praise from senior Starfleet officers. And this would, unfortunately, prove to be the high point of the Cheyenne-class's service, as it would end with disappointment. In 2362, the USS Avar suffered a major structural failure while at high warp, the vessel disintegrating in less than a second, taking her entire crew down with her in a painless, though still horrific accident. Starfleet responded to this disaster quickly, ordering all Cheyenne-class ships to head for the nearest starbase at low warp, accompanied, where possible, by other ships to monitor them as they traveled. Once they arrived, they were to power down all non-vital systems and be searched over thoroughly by base technicians to identify any potential cause for the loss of Avar. This process would last 9 months, completing early in 2363 with the release of an alarming report showing significant stress fractures on the primary structural members of all Cheyenne class, with the older ships showing the stresses the most. Probable causes for the fractures were suggested, but the report mentioned an official investigation be launched to more firmly determine the true reason before any conclusions were reached. And this more in-depth investigation was quickly launched, and just quickly concluded in 3 months with the determination that the high warp speeds at which the ships had routinely traveled had put much higher than anticipated stresses on the ship's space frames, far more than structural integrity fields were able to manage adequately, with the result that the physical structure of the ship had begun cracking under the stress. Of the 14 ships still in service, 7, including USS Cheyenne, were found to have so much structural damage that they were immediately withdrawn from service, with the other survivors being limited to warp factor 6 at maximum, and required to have regular surveys of their hulls to closely follow the degradation of the ship's structure. How these stresses were not anticipated then became the question of the day, but after yet another investigation, it was determined that existing stress calculations had failed to accurately determine how stresses scaled at such high speeds. The 7 surviving ships would all be kept close to the Federation core, where several would then be lost during the Battle of Wolf 359, 2 ships being destroyed in the fighting and a third badly damaged and later withdrawn from service. The 4 ships of the class which survived would remain in service until 2370, when it was determined that the degradation of their hulls had reached dangerous levels and they would be scrapped. Although the Cheyenne would have a brief, tragedy-ridden life within Starfleet, the innovative features and forward-looking theories of the ship's design would later influence multiple successive Starfleet vessels. The concept of a fast reconnaissance cruiser eventually culminating with the Intrepid class of roughly a decade later. Representing what happens when you attempt to push technology far beyond understanding, the Cheyenne is a stark and pertinent reminder for Starfleet as it heads into the 25th century. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, feel free to give it a like. Drop a comment about what you think about the Cheyenne class. I really like this design, but it's not one I hear anybody really honestly talking about all that often. And I think for good reason. It appeared destroyed in a background shot of Best of Both Worlds, I think part 2. So it's kind of a more obscure ship, but I think it looks really cool. Constellation is one of my favorite Starfleet ships ever, and the Cheyenne is kind of an updated next-gen version of that. So I actually really like it. Your mileage may vary, of course, but yeah, let me know what you think of the class. Also, all of the artwork that I use in these videos is available on the channel's Patreon, which is linked below. You don't have to join the channel's Patreon to get access to the artwork. I just keep it there as kind of an archive, and it's there if anybody wants it. Also, you can join the channel's Patreon. It's like $1 a month. It gets you stuff, some things that I think are pretty cool. You could join, you get like early access to videos, you get votes on what ships are going to be covered each month, that kind of stuff. It's pretty cool. I mean, yeah. I think I've gone on long enough now for all of this. But anyway, yeah. Hope you enjoyed. Catch the next video.